Hey everyone, welcome to episode 14 of the ScaleupStream podcast. I'm your host, Hugh Seth, and we've had some of the most amazing lists of investors join us, such as Thomas Hung, founder of Startup Mentors. We've had Dana Robinson on recently. She's an investor at E8 Angels, and also Sal Lucido, an investor at South Valley Angels. Now, it's always such an amazing journey just being able to pick these investors' brain and just learn and grow and just see their unique ways of approaching venture capital and approaching investing, and just their various thesis and what they've learned along the way and how they help startups. It's just such an amazing journey just to be able to just have these opportunities to sit down and just have a conversation so that we could learn and grow together, right? Today we have Shama Mahar joining us. She is an advisor of pre-rev and early growth stage startups. She is such a pioneer when it comes to the NFT space, and we discuss the future of retail, NFTs, startups, Web 3.0, and her investment thesis. I'm super excited. Let's dive in. All right, so Shama, you're an expert in retail and fashion. You've worked for brands like Macy's and Barney's New York as a buyer. What led you to this industry, and how did you know this is where you want to leave your mark?
It's a great question. I was one of those kids at the age of 9 who wrote my first paper, which is obviously not very good at the age of 9, on why things went on sale at Macy's. I was so curious. Obviously, going to the mall is a typical part of a young person's experience. And I distinctly remember one weekend wanting something, and the next weekend it was on sale. And I was like, wow, what is this about? So I'd say that my proclivities to this industry started at a very young age, with a love of Macy's. So it really kind of came full circle for me when I ended up working there after I graduated university. But really, that started it. And then, throughout high school, I had a very strong awakening around a love for economics and really understanding macroeconomics and micro, and the whole world of economics opened up to me. And so I really kind of took this combined love of fashion and aesthetics, and looked to apply it in a way that was going to be really meaningful. And having a passion for something like economics and understanding the way the world works, I could have either gone into finance or I could have gone into fashion. And most people don't realize this, but fashion is very financially based. And I think it's one of the misconceptions that most people have about the industry.
Okay, yeah, and I'm happy that you said you brought in the whole financial aspect to everything, because that leads into the next question perfectly. Because I saw your post on LinkedIn there where now you accept Ethereum as a form of payment at Scaling Retail. So this makes a ton of sense as a creative and an NFT pioneer as yourself. So tell us more about that.
The decision to start to take Ethereum as a form of payment for scaling retail was a decision that was made really by the people who wanted to pay me in Ethereum. So when it comes to, one of the most important things that I believe in as a retailer, as a evangelist in Web3, as really just someone who's focused around consumer, is I always want to follow where the money is. I want to be able to be where the money is. And if people want to pay me through cryptocurrency, well, who am I to reject payment, right? It's really important to start to, like a truffle hunter, I'm sniffing out the truffles. And right now it feels like, more and more brands and more people are coming to Scaling Retail to get support in Web3, and as they're building out their brands, and they want to pay in crypto. And to be honest, it's really interesting because in the last few years, we've seen the rise of all these crypto millionaires. And so these crypto millionaires need to have marketplace, and they need to have places to spend their resources. Otherwise, it loses value, loses that intrinsic emotional value. So I would like to be a part and am a part of the way in which we are doing business that will become more standardized.
Okay, so how would startups know when it's the right time to start accepting crypto? It's just that when there's a volume of customers that are seeking it, or how do you know that as a startup?
Hmm. So, what's really interesting is there are a lot of legal implications around that, in terms of being ready to accept crypto and what that looks like. So, it's really important to understand that there is a big legal component here, and that means both in terms of being ready for the next set of changes and rollouts that the government comes up with, which honestly can change almost any day, right? I mean, we've
Hmm.
all seen what the power of an executive order can do. And certainly there's always that opportunity and risk with crypto. But I think it's a few fold. I think it's kind of the same. It's almost the same way in which I would tell someone whether or not to use TikTok or use Instagram, which is, where are your customers?
Right.
What are they engaging in? How are they spending their time, their money? What are the ways in which you are catering to them? So for a
Hmm.
lot of companies, starting to accept cryptocurrency may not make any sense. It may not make sense to have a legal team to help build out the infrastructure. It may not make sense to buy your, wallet address for your
Hmm.
brand name if you're not anticipating and planning to be catering to a demographic that is going to be using those products or services today. Now, I think the onboarding of crypto over time in the next 10 years is going to be a lot more standardized, almost to how we think about, using a MasterCard or Visa or your Chase Bank, and all those
Right.
decentralized, financial products, I think will become a lot more mainstream. But as of today, it's saying, it's almost like being on the new social media platform that only some early adopters are on, that only is relevant to those early adopters. So I think a lot of it is relevancy and staging your relevancy based on your customer base.
All right, so I want us to discuss your current role as an advisor to pre-rev and early growth stage startups. Before doing so, I want to know, as an NFT and Web3 evangelist, what innovations have you seen or are anticipating from NFTs and Web3s that excites you most?
Hmm. I think what's really exciting about NFTs and Web3 is simply the inevitability of it all. I think that right now there's a lot of resistance towards what does it mean, and there's friction, and I think that it's being accurately put under scrutiny, as any new innovation should be. We would not be the people who we are with inquisitive natures if we didn't try to analyze everything. So I think that it's appropriate that we're analyzing NFTs and Web3. At the same time, I think there is a inevitability of how we onboard and start to use it. Again, maybe not today, it can't be seen, but give it a few more years and it will start to permeate the ways in which we do business as infrastructure, very similar to how artificial intelligence is now in so many places that we don't even actually realize, right? So I
Right.
believe that Web3 and NFTs, really, it's not the technology that people will gravitate towards. It's the
Hmm.
brands and the utility that people gravitate towards that is using NFTs and Web3, right? So I think we need to look at it as the backbone and infrastructure that it is, more so than kind of this hypiness around, is it going to last or not? It's here. People have been working on this technology for a long time. It's not the new. It's new to us, but it's not new in terms of the technology. Now, in terms of just like where it's heading, I think utility is very important. I think that, the most exciting things that I'm noticing are really the agencies and the companies that are at that cross section of where Web3 meets consumer. That to me
Mm.
is the most interesting. That is where I choose to spend most of my time. How are we developing products and services that are going to really meet the consumer where they are at, rather than asking them to jump over all these hurdles to
Right.
meet the technology.
Right. Okay. Now, as far as your role as an advisor, how have you been helping your startups and those that you're working with?
Yeah, it's thank you for asking that. So really, when it comes to how I work with brands and companies, it's really in a variety of spaces. And I think as any person in the entrepreneurial ecosystem will probably attest, you wear the hat of advisor, investor, consultant. I'm also a founder myself. So, you kind of wear all the hats when you're really in the space, right? And
Right.
so I feel fortunate to have my calling be met with the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, predominantly, right, I work with brands as a consultant, mostly because a lot of these very early stage companies lack foundational infrastructure and understanding of tailoring and creating the right business models for their success, right? They're generally speaking first time founders who come to me first time in the space of building brand, and they really want to understand, how do I create the right synergy between my budgets, my vision, and my skill set as a founder. And
Mm,
I have a very unique capability to be able to see the intersection of those three and then guide my founders through business model creation and strategy that helps them satisfy that. Oftentimes, many founders will pick up other people's strategies and they'll look at other founders and say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to try that on for size. But ultimately, the right models come through understanding yourself as a leader, as a founder, and then combining that with timelines and budgets. So that is really where I find my sweet spot. Now, as an advisor, investor, I'm typically working at brands at later stages, right? And those
okay.
are going to be brands that are in the process of, you know, perhaps they're in their, Series A, right? Or
Okay.
they are kind of, they're post product, right? So they're really into the space right now of taking a look at what is working and what is not working. And that I think is really interesting because at a certain point in time, right, you're constantly looking back to see what are the iterations. And typically I'm working with brands. There are sometimes in an oh shit phase, right? Oh shit, I'm moving too fast. Oh shit, moving too
Right.
slow, right? How do I look and find that special sauce? And so as an advisor, what I think is the most interesting part of the work that I do is I
Hmm.
get to really have my hands involved in lots of different business models across lots of different sectors, right? So while my background might be predominantly in fashion, direct to consumer, luxury, I now have the capabilities and have the insight and strategy across categories from things like cannabis and CBD to beauty categories to now technology categories. And that just really compounds, I guess, my value.
Wow. So that's a wide range from retail to cannabis, and I mean, I wonder how's this whole cannabis world going to is it going is there a transition to the metaverse even for cannabis, or are we just keeping things in the physical realms for now?
I mean, I don't know. Can you get high in the metaverse? I mean, there's like, it's like,
You
I
know,
don't know.
I, I know investors that are, purchasing a ton of land in the metaverse. Even like I work with an investor who's purchased land at Disney World, and he was visiting and he was checking out his land while he was at Disney. I'm like, man, that's pretty neat. But I'm wondering, how does that work? So is there going to come a time where Disney's like, no, that's my land physically, so it is my land in the metaverse as well? Or I know that I'm throwing things off on a swivel right now, but just on that cannabis point right there, something that is more tangible here in the physical realms. How are things like that even being transitioned to the metaverse, or is it not?
I have a great example.
Hmm.
I currently purchased an NFT from a company that is launching a cannabis brand. And
Okay.
what was really interesting about that is the NFT gives you access. And so when you
Mm.
think about things like social clubs, right? When you think about
Ah.
things that are around community building, right? So I purchased an NFT from a group called Studio TBD, and their activations are around leveraging and purchasing blue chip NFTs, right? And combining that with a product strategy to launch cannabis. And that gives you access to discounts. It gives you access to community. So I think already we're seeing NFTs as a fantastic player in the space of community building. And there is no better community to apply that to, I would say, than the world of cannabis and what those really specific communities are like. So that I think is an immediate application of it. And then I've also been consulting and working with a woman who is developing and already launched these very high 3D renderings that belong in the metaverse, cannabis renderings of what the plant looks like. And that I think is very interesting as well. So when you start to think about, metaverse and having property or having, being able to grow things, I do think you're going to have people who want the social clout of being in that space, right? Social capital. And who knows, maybe it's going to be the 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds that are growing cannabis in the metaverse, but can't grow it at home. And it gives them some sort of clout in terms of how they're engaging with other people, right? So I think that when we think about, our expressions of self in the metaverse, in Decentraland, in these spaces, we have to remember that these are avatars and that these can be people who we are not, right? I might build myself up to be a drug lord in Decentraland. And meanwhile, I'm over here advising these direct-to-consumer fashion companies, right? So it's important to remember that these are expressions of ourselves and not necessarily who we are on the day-to-day.
Okay, yeah. Cool that you brought up the communities, because that's something I wanted to ask you about, just on your perspective on the future of brands, communities. I mean, I've seen things like, for instance, Gary Vee, when his events that he's been hosting, if you're part of his community, NFTs and what have you, then you can have access to these events. So it seems very exclusive and stuff like that. But outside of just the surface level, having access to events and parties or whatever it is that is on a social level that artist or person is going to put together, how else does branding and communities look in the future when we bring in NFTs and everything?
Yeah, what I think is exciting is, people are doing in-person minting, all right? They're doing, what I love, and this is a topic that I just spoke about recently, was, a POAP, which is, proof of attendance protocol, which is basically the opportunity to airdrop proof that you did something, proof that you attended something. So I think that as we look at building out our digital wallets, again, that are a form of expression, I think we will find that, people will be looking, just as we used to collect, ticket stubs for concerts, we will be looking to collect NFTs as proof of who we are and be able to share that. We used to have to know someone's handle on Instagram to be able to find them, right? But if you think about something like, maybe they were private or not private, but when you think about something like NFTs and the blockchain, it's all public, and who you are is visible for the world to see. Some people who haven't yet experienced their first existential crisis might be scared of that because they're not aware of who they are and how they show up in the world. But other people like myself are like, hey, I want you to see and know who I am, right? And so I think that Web3 and blockchain is this proof of sovereignty of who you are. And so when it comes to building community, it's like, it's for example, saying like, okay, well, everyone on Gucci's, Facebook page, well, those aren't all Gucci purchasers, right? Like, who are those? Like 99% of those people probably don't own anything Gucci, right? And meanwhile, I'm out there trying to figure out, where do I find the other people who actually are the ones participating, are the ones who are purchasing those handbags? blockchain technology allows me to find who my people are, right, in a very authentic and real way, as opposed to who they say they are, right? And so I think what's very interesting with blockchain is, you put your money where your mouth is, right? Like if you're willing to say, yes, let me showcase and stand up for who I am and share all those parts of myself, well, then you're going to be attracting other people who are doing the same. And I think that's where we are in the advent right now of Web3, which is if you want a seat at the table, go and get it. And you're going to meet other people who are also at that table.
How can a startup go about building strong community, right? And a brand that is actually going to be one where people are having results as the Gary V's, or where you could show up to an event and people are actually minting or coming through because they're part of this community. And how would a startup go about building such a thing?
Consistency. I think the problem is that we're so used to comparing our insides to other people's outsides. We see what Gary Vee has done, and the first thing we do is we look inside of ourselves and go, oh my God, I couldn't do that, or how do I do that, or I'm not capable. And so I think that when we look at our own unique ways of building community, we have to look at what our personal core competencies are and what is it that we can maintain consistently. I've had over the course of my career a number of people, specifically at the helm, as I've been at the helm of scaling retail, who've come to me and said, well, how did you build your brand? How did you build audience? Why, how, and tell me. And I say, well, I picked the things that I knew how to do well, and I did them consistently over a long period of time. People know when you're faking the funk. That's it. Like, you don't just show up day one and people are there, right? Unless you have endorsements, right? Unless you have other people who are building up your social capital. Even still, when you look at celebrity endorsements and you look at external social capital, it might get you some traffic. It might give you some eyeballs to what you're doing. However, if you don't actually have consistently strong media presence, or you're not showing up consistently, then they fall away. And that's proof, right? If you don't have something that people want, then yeah, you can pay for this person to promote you, but they're going to come see what you got, and then they're going to leave if it's not the right fit. So Oftentimes I see so many people misfiring when they hire influencers as a way to bypass their actual brand building efforts. And it's a bypass, and it doesn't work. You cannot solely rely on that. So it's about showing up consistently in the ways in which you can deliver the one piece of information about who you are, and doing it over and over and over again. And for me, it happens to be public speaking, getting on camera and talking to people. That's the thing that I can do over and over again. I love it. It's in my genius zone. I don't have to try too hard. But for other people, might be writing, and it might be being on Twitter. It might be their consistent, articles that they write for Forbes. It might be, whatever the channel is that they're going to do well. For brands, for individuals, for anybody, right? You got to pick your path, do it well. That I think is what Gary Vee did so well. He started on YouTube. He started doing these videos. He didn't know what the hell he was doing. He was just doing it. He kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And people caught on. Now he's been able to pivot what he does. He's been able to grow an audience. And I do believe that others can see that sort of, vision of themselves in the world, but it's not going to be through following what Gary Vee did. It's going to be about looking at his strategy and how well it applied to him, and then finding your own strategy as it applies to you.
All right. So we've discussed a number of things here, and I'm just really appreciative of your time. Now, before we do get off today, Shama, I want to know, what is your investment thesis? I mean, we've gotten a glimpse, but what is the whole thing? If a startup was looking to come to you for capital, what are you looking for in them?
Yeah. So I would say the majority of my investments are going towards, female-led startups. I am a big fan of the concept of implicit bias. And the reason why is because for the longest time, implicit bias has worked so far against the majority of women and people of color. But I do think that as we see more and more investors, and I think entrepreneurs who are turning investors as people of color and women, I think that, implicit bias is going to work for us. And that is something that I'm very bullish on. So for myself, I look predominantly at women, people of color led projects. I'm looking at companies that are in that direct to consumer space where I can very quickly assess, whether or not they have what it takes and what the model looks like, and where I can add value, right? It's really important for me that when you look at investing, it's a long-term horizon. There's a high risk that many companies won't work out. So the more that not only my capital is being deployed, but that I'm able to actually add value, well, then I'm likely going to see a much higher return, or a return in general, of what it is that I'm deploying. So that, I would say, is kind of the general thesis. So it's mostly direct to consumer, mostly people of color, women-led projects. And then also looking at other verticals, right? So I'm very interested in where the cannabis space is moving. I'm very interested in where we're heading in terms of Web3 technology. And then direct to consumer, again, is just, easy for me because it's where I've lived my life.
Shama, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on the ScaleupStream podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.